All right, we're on to this class on Pirke Avos, holding by Pirke Avos, Ethics of Our Fathers. As is known, we are in second chapter, Mishna 16. It's part, what part is it? 52 will be probably part 53, 54, 55, 56, right? There'll be a lot here, a lot of different parts here again. Holding by Pirke Avos. Ethics of Our Fathers. We are in chapter 2, Mishnah 16, and we're speaking about definitely been speaking about the Eitar, right? Right? The evil inclination. And we said in the name of Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua says evil eye, evil inclination, hatred of other people, remove a person from this world. Right? So we're speaking last number of weeks about the evil inclination and the effect that it has on us, the effect, the outside world. We're speaking about that as well. That effect of the outside world, effect of other things that convinces us to try and do things that may be not good for us. I'll give an example. I saw something earlier that there's a question. There's a question by the Keda, by the binding of Isaac. There's a question. Why wasn't there a test? Why does everyone say seemingly the test is by Avram, right? Test is not by Yitzhak. Yitzhak was 37 years old, right? And he went willingly, right? So tremendous test for Yitzhak as well. But the thing that I saw was interesting was that what does the Satan, the evil inclination, do? To Avram. So many things tries to convince him not to do it, tries to stop him on the way, right? All kinds of other things. And then I saw something interesting that's brought down the Midrash says, what does the Satan do? What does Satan try and convince him? Satan tries to convince him, says, look, okay, you want to do it. You're going to do it. Yeah, the Satan says, but was it worth it? Because what happens? He gets home, what happens? He finds out Sarah dies. Right? Finds out that Sarah dies. Very good. Yes, what does the evil inclination say? The evil inclination says, see, you listen to this divine command. Okay. Look what the end result is. Yeah. Okay, you didn't kill him. Yeah. God stopped you from killing him. Very good. But at the end of the day, what happened? Right? At the end of the day, the inclination says, look what you did. Right? Look what you did over here. You caused your own wife's death. So Abraham himself obviously doesn't listen. But imagine what he's feeling at that point. Imagine the pain that he feels. The hard thing going through the test, yeah, extremely difficult test. Right? As we mentioned many times before, you see that he would never have reached his potential, his legacy, had he not gone through this last test. I was 9 for 9, had a tremendous legacy. But as we always say, unreached potential is unreached potential. Right? In other words, we do say if a person, wants to do a mitzvah and they didn't do it, they get credit as if they did it. But if they start a mitzvah, they don't finish it. As the Gemara says, you bury your wife and your kids in your lifetime. What's the difference? So look at the latter first, right? If a person starts a mitzvah, why didn't you finish it? Now, if you're under onus, something beyond your control, it's one thing. Yeah, you couldn't finish it. But what are you essentially telling God, the fact you couldn't finish it? What are you telling him? Wasn't that important? Right? Oh, you're going to tell me, you're doing the mitzvah, you're doing part of the mitzvah, okay. But you didn't finish. You got distracted. Whatever it is. Right? Again, we're not talking something that is beyond your control. If it's beyond your control, you're exempt. Right? You're totally exempt. But what are you telling God himself? It's not that important. So therefore, you bury your wife and kids in your lifetime. Severe punishment. Very, very severe punishment. But if I want to do a mitzvah, if my ultimate goal is I want to do X mitzvah, but you don't do it, for whatever reason, even you got distracted, whatever, but you had the ratzon, you had the desire, and you didn't finish, so you didn't start it, for whatever reason, doesn't mean it's not important. The important thing is what I think. Totally what I think. Not just the action. Action's part of it. Yeah, but where's my mind? Where's my mind? All right, I'll give an example. I was telling someone today. I was telling someone earlier today that we're speaking, whatever, last Shabbos about, someone prays and they say, because I prayed so well, my prayers are going to be answered. One of the worst transgressions a person can do. It's what we call iyun tefillah. Right? That a person prayed so well, and so much intention, that they know God's going to answer their prayers. Yeah? Now, that's the ultimate in hubris. That's the ultimate, good SAT word, right? That's the ultimate in being conceited. As if to say, I prayed so well. Yeah, I prayed so well, obviously God's going to answer me. God doesn't have to answer you. He absolutely doesn't have to answer you. He doesn't owe you anything. The fact that he gives us a portion of the world to come if we do what he says, right? You get the hutzi, as we always say, right? Why, says Chof Tzavos, why do you get it? Chof Tzavos says because God wants to do chesed. God wants to do an act of loving kindness. He doesn't have to give you. Right? Don't we say, the Mishna Pirke Avos says, that why you're going to say, I did this, I did that, I did the other thing, right? All these great mitzvahs, and you're going to pat yourself on the back. What do you mean? That is what you're created to do. So if that's what you're created to do, what are you bragging about? That's your obligation. That is your obligation. But to say, I prayed so well, God is for sure going to answer me, right? What do the commentaries say over there? It's the ultimate being conceited. What? Just because, let's say, I'll get to the punchline here, but let's say you said, look what I did. Look how well I prayed. Look how much I did this and did that. Very good. And what's God going to say? Tremendous. I'm going to give you whatever you ask for. That's what you're commanded to do. You got to pray, right? Guy's got to pray 3 times a day. Jew has to pray 3 times a day. Yeah, with a minyan. So you got to say, I'm God's gift to the world. I prayed so well. Yeah. So anyway, whatever. So last week I was, telling someone this, and said, but who knows where your mind is during prayer, right? It should be focused. Very good. Person could be, looking at the prayer book, making all the motions, are very good, but they're not praying. Their mind is elsewhere. So we sort of continued the conversation this week, right? And because he was bothered. This friend of mine was bothered. He said, very depressing if you think about it. I said, yeah. I said, imagine after a person dies, after 120 years, the person gets upstairs. God's going to, check everything you did. He's going to say, okay, let's check prayer. Let's see what you did. Let's see what you did over here. So God looks, and he says, okay, I give you credit for 150 prayers. I said, 150 prayers? I'm praying for 30 years. 40 years, I should have thousands of prayers. Right? Most of the time, you pray 3 times a day, let's say. Very good. What do you mean I only have 150? The person calls God on, what do you mean 150? God says, okay, let me play back the video. Let me show you. Let me show you what you did during all the times you prayed. Yeah? God says, okay, this I'm going to accept. This I'm going to reject. This I'm going to reject. Now, the person seeing themselves, imagine, they're watching the video, squirming, I'm sure. Watching this video, yeah, and they're not going to have any excuses here. Because God is showing them, he's opening the person's mind. He's going back in time and saying, okay, this is what you pray. This is how you prayed. Now, you want credit for this? You really want credit for this? Look where your mind was. Right? So we mentioned many times, to pray with a group of 10 men is much better than praying on your own unless you can't get to synagogue. Right? If you do, or let's say there's no menu where you are, whatever it is. Yeah. Why is that better? Because you call the congregation. When God looks at the congregation a lot differently than he's going to look at an individual, right? I think it's what was last week, right? That God's going to look at you totally different. Why? Because you're part of a group. And if there are sinners there and you're a sinner as well for whatever a person, God forbid, has done wrong. Yeah, I hope we've done some good things that are right. Very good. But what's the person going to think? Right? Sorry, what's God going to tell you here? If you're part of a group, that's much better because God's looking at the whole group. If you're an individual, it doesn't apply to women, but if you're an individual, no matter why you didn't go to synagogue, right? Unless you're sick. Yeah, then you don't have an obligation to pray either way. But let's say you don't have where to go, you're too busy, I don't know, whatever it is that you don't have any excuse. You can't claim onus. You can't claim it's beyond my capability, right? It was something, I couldn't get out of. Okay, you have no claim here. So God is going to judge that much more harshly. Why? Because you're alone. So then God's going to watch you by yourself, not included with other people. If you're included with other people, it's a lot easier. Tremendously easier. In that sense. So then why'd we say God's not going to accept these prayers, even if you're with a lot of people? What were you doing? You said you weren't praying. Or even if you were, let's say. You're saying the words. Forget about Kabbalistic intention or anything else. You're saying the words. Okay. But don't we say mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana? Mitzvahs don't need intention? In general, that's true. Why? Because I understood the psyche of man. We're not always going to have the greatest intention. Sometimes we have better intention. Sometimes we have worse intention. Right? But imagine, we're praying, our mind is totally elsewhere. It's totally elsewhere. Thinking about stuff with our kids, stuff with our job. We're thinking of all kinds of things that we're really not allowed to think about during this time. Person has to be focused. They must focus. Because okay, it can happen. Very good. But God could look at it and say, you're not praying though. Saying the words and going through the motions does not mean you're praying. Yeah? So a person can do all that and get no credit. Because they say, what's the point? So why should I bother? Right? And this is how this conversation came up. So why bother? It's catch-22. Yeah, we're going to be taking a task so much, for what I do, what my intention is and this and that. So why bother? I'll be miyash. I'll give up hope. There's no hope. How are you going to survive? How are you going to survive that interrogation? It's not going to be a long interrogation, right? God's going to see it black on white. You're going to see it black on white. Yeah? You're going to be totally embarrassed. What are you going to do? There's no repentance at this point. You're dead. What are you supposed to do? The embarrassment. God's ultimately right. So again, it's a catch-22. So you're telling me you got to pray, a guy's got to pray 3 times a day with a meeting with 10 men. Very good. That's the obligation. But you're going to tell me maybe 1 out of 3, 1 out of 10 are going to get accepted. Maybe, but God should have mercy. Hopefully God should have mercy. But you can't just say the words and go through the motions and not think about what you're doing. That's why you can't rush into prayer. You got to think about what you're doing. You say, well, don't I know I'm praying in front of God? Isn't that minimal level? Isn't that minimal level over here? Maybe. Maybe it is. So maybe get some sort of credit. Right? So anyway, we're back and forth basically saying that, back to our topic here, that's a catch-22. Because, first of all, who has the greatest amount of attention anyway? That's true. Very weak generation, very true. Right? But a person could say, well, if I think about it too much, what's going to happen? Like Rebbe says, if you live in the past, you have no future. Doesn't mean you totally blow it off, right? But at the same time, what can happen? What can happen? A person can say, there's no point. Because, if I'm going to be taking a test for every little thing I do, and I'm only going to get, let's say, 30% credit for what I've done, why bother? Why bother? I want the maximum credit. Very good. We all want maximum credit for what we do. Okay. You got to put in effort. You got to work hard. God's going to judge a person wherever they're holding. Okay. God's going to have compassion. He's going to understand to a point. But at the end of the day, couldn't God say, well, this isn't even close to being up to par. Right? Not even close. So again, a person can say, okay, if God's going to judge me like that, there's no hope. Right? There's no hope. Right? I might as well give up. On the other hand, a person could say, wrongly, and this was the point of the discussion, a person can say, I had great intention. I had such great intention, God's going to accept whatever I need. He's going to give me whatever I need. Okay. Why is that so bad? God can either decide to give to you or not give to you. Doesn't have to. Right? Doesn't have to give you that, whatever a person decides. He could or he couldn't. He doesn't have to either way. Doesn't have any obligation. Yeah. He does out of mercy. Right? He may not give it to you because it's not good for you. Dangerous for you. People always say, I need more money, this, that, whatever. But let's say God gave you more money. Yeah. I'm not saying just, break it even. Not being in the red every month or whatever. Not even talking about that. First, that's extra. Extra. Said, if I only had more, I give more to charity. I can help others more. Well, what can happen if a person has more? They waste it. They waste it on other things. Someone asked the rabbi once this question. He said, if I work more, let's say it like this. Should I work more so I can make more money, give more to charity? Do I have an obligation to do so? Now, what was the answer? No. Whatever you make, that's what you give. Right? You give charity, you give it. Right? But the fact you have to work more so you can make more to give more. No obligation. No obligation. You don't have to kill yourself to do that. You give what you can give. Right? That's what you're supposed to do. Now, in this case, you could say, though, that's great intention. That's great intention. Yeah. How many people are going to uphold to that? And what if they make crazy amount of money? Yeah. What does that do? A person has 100, you want 200. You have 200, you want 400. Never ends. But you say, I have the right intention. Okay. How many people pray they should hit the lottery? Right? Many people pray they should hit the lottery. Yeah. So what inevitably happens when someone hits the lottery? Let's say for millions, tens of millions. Right? So a person will probably take a lump sum up front to lose 20%. Let's say it's still worth it. Right? Person made $30 million, they lost 5 or 6 million, fine, you still get 20 million left, 24 million. Very good. Yeah. If you look at people who won the lottery, almost every single one of them, went from, rags to riches or from middle class to mega wealth. They lost it all. Not only that, they died penniless, most of them. Caused family fights, other things. It never ends good. Never ends good. Yeah. But people say, that's what I want. And God can say, I'm not going to give it to you. You know why? Because it'll be bad for you. Yeah, excess would be bad. Even if you have the right intention. You can have the greatest intention. But what happens? Person, their mind goes crazy. They have this money, they'll never have to work another day in their life. Yeah. Their kids will be taken care of, generations down the line. Yeah, so what's the problem? Why does it end up this way? Because if a person doesn't work, right? In general, if they have everything given to them and they have plenty of money, it usually ends bad, right? Because there's no purpose in life. I know somebody recently, whatever, uh, whatever, a while ago I heard this. Someone's father dies, worth a lot of money, right? And he gave two of his kids $20 million. They're young. They're in their early 20s, maybe. Maybe. I think either one of them are 30. Yeah, $20 million. What are you gonna do with $20 million? Say, further would say, $20 million doesn't go as far as it used to. Okay. $20 million, think about it. Money means nothing to them. They were wealthy before, it's just now they have the money themselves. What are you gonna do with $20 million? Why would God give someone that kind of money? I don't know. Whatever they use it for. Yeah, they don't work for it. They didn't earn it. Smith Barney, right? I remember those Smith Barney commercials. We make money the old-fashioned way. We earned it, right? Very good. Person earned it. They use it for whatever. Person was gifted it. They didn't work for it. It's a whole different thing. Use it in different ways. Yeah. Use it in totally different ways. Someone's got a silver spoon, pour a silver spoon in their mouth. They become arrogant. They think they own the world because they have a name and whatever. Yeah, because of their last name, whatever it is. That's inevitably what happens. I'm saying always, right? Definitely not always, but a lot of times. Right? A lot of times that is the case. And either way, think about it. These kids have $20 million. $40 million between them. That's a certain amount of money. Okay. Father earned it however he earned it. Very good. Yeah, it's an absurd amount of money. What are you going to use it for? You can tell me you're going to set a fund, it's going to gain interest, whatever. You're going to help the poor, you're going to do, tremendously good things. Okay. Yeah. But it's true, it's not true. Yeah, whatever. People have great ideals. Some people. You see, there are people that amassed an amazing amount of wealth. They're giving it all away. They're giving it all away. Okay. Now, I would say, let's see what they're giving it to. Are they giving it to anything worthwhile? Forget about Torah. I'm saying in general. Okay, they, give it to wherever they want to give it. Okay. Yeah. Not my job to tell them where to give it. They're not going to listen anyway. So they give it to what they give it to. Okay. So you have some people like that. Yeah. But the vast majority, what do? They blow it. By cars, houses, other things. You can't even use that amount of money. How much money, people make. It's crazy. Anyway, why would God not give this to a person? Right? Because it's bad for them. So even though they pray, that's what they want. God thinks it's bad for them. They won't get it. Now, what does the person want more than anything else? Make ends meet, cover my bills. That's it. But what happens when you have excess, right? We've spoken about this before. What happens when you have excess? You use it for things you probably don't need. Probably eat better, right? But again, probably things you don't need, right? You probably be, obese or close to obese or whatever because you just eat a lot because you have. You don't exercise, you don't do other things. So it leads to a lot of negative things. Yeah, again, it can be used for good things. I'm not saying not, but this is what it does to the mind. And then a person might think, I'm gifted this money, very good. Why should I help others? Let them help themselves. And they forget. They forget very quickly. So money can be a curse, right? It definitely can be a curse. But at the end of the day, why, as I was telling this person, why is it that this is one of the worst transgressions? That a person thinks, that, God's going to answer my prayers because I prayed so well. It's arrogance. That's why it's bad. Shouldn't we think, okay, I prayed, I did what I was supposed to do. God do the rest. God take care of business. I need more of this, more. Okay, we can pray for our needs. We can definitely pray for our needs, right? Well, some people say, but I'm stuck in this situation forever, right? And things have never, things have spiraled, and now, look at the situation. Happens. Why does it happen? It could happen for any number of reasons. Yeah, I know of a story many years ago, many years ago. I've told the story before that a woman worked very hard, made a lot of money, worked overtime, his kids' birthdays, this, that, had this nest egg in a certain 401k, whatever it was. Come to find out that money's gone. At the end of her life, the money's gone. Now she can't work. Yeah. So she worked all those years, putting money aside, missing important events, in her family because whatever, she had to work and this was the goal and got to see the world and do whatever, when she retires and, and all that, beautiful. And what happened? The whole thing got taken away. The whole thing, not even part of it, gone. Yeah. Totally gone. So what does this person say? Now, you can be bitter. You can think, wow, I worked my whole life. I got nothing shown for it. Okay. Let's say the person's still married, and they have kids and whatever. Okay. Yeah, I lose everything. Yeah, but to them, this was the most important thing. The most important thing to put all this money aside so I can enjoy life when I'm older. Yeah, I can go see the world and do whatever. I have no worries. Okay. Right? That's an ideal. By some people. That's an ideal. Okay. Well, but this person miraculously saw what happened. Right? They saw in front of their eyes everything they worked for, everything they missed, everything they self-sacrificed for. They got nothing. Right? I might have mentioned the story last week also, but they got nothing. In the end, they have nothing left. What does that do to a person? Break them. It'll for sure break them. How did the Egyptians break the Jewish spirits when the Jews were in Egypt? They made them build things, and they worked very hard to build these structures, whatever, but it was built on faulty land, right? It was built on land that would never withhold these things. So eventually what's going to happen, they're building this thing, it's going to collapse. Probably some people are going to die when it collapses, right? But at some point it's going to collapse. So they would build these things, imagine. You're building something that has no purpose. Has zero purpose. Not only has zero purpose, but when, let's say after a month, day in and day out, you're building this thing. Yeah. Every month, the structure comes down. Whether people die or not, doesn't really matter. Yeah. The point is, the structure comes down. So they know. Now they have to clean it up. They say, okay, start again from scratch. That breaks the person. Why? Because they see everything that they're doing has no point. It's no purpose. It's kind of like the gerbil going on the swing, and it's going around and around and around. No purpose in that. I don't know, maybe he gets exercise and enjoys it. I don't know, whatever it is, but there's no purpose. A person has to have a purpose. Has some purpose. So now this person concludes, towards the end of their life, they make the following conclusion. They said, I missed all these birthday parties, I missed important things. And the most important thing to me was making enough money so I could put away. So in the end, what could I do? I could go see the world and relax and all that. But then something happened. Then the whole thing gets taken away. The whole thing gets taken away. So the person makes a calculation and says, so basically I worked my whole life thinking every day, putting more money away, the nest egg is getting bigger, very good. So they feel confident, very good, and it's gone. So they're like, what kind of sick joke is that? They thought about it, made them think because, who wants to be poverty-stricken at the end of their life? Nobody, right? Who wants to think they worked their whole lives for nothing? Nobody. Nobody wants to think that. It's demoralizing. Wouldn't be surprised it went to suicide. Right? A person can be totally crushed. Absolutely crushed. They worked this hard, they got nothing. But what did they realize? Came to an amazing conclusion, because not everyone's going to come to this conclusion. They came to it. Well, what was the conclusion? The conclusion was they admitted that their ideals were wrong. What they wanted, they thought was so important, was wrong. And that everything they worked for, okay, not saying a person shouldn't work, person should, try and put money away, very good, right? Person in their life, you got, health issues, other things, you want to have, hopefully, you may have some money put away, whatever, whatever it may be, okay. Doesn't always work out that way, but okay. That's fine. But someone's going to say, well, I want to make as much money as possible. And then I want to see the world and whatever. It's not, what's the purpose in that? The same, seeing the world. There's a purpose in it. Seeing God's creation. So we had discussion before, about leaving, say a person was in Israel, leaving Israel to go on vacation. You don't have to leave Israel to go on vacation. So the Gemara says there's certain things, if you live in Israel, you're allowed to leave for. Get married is one of them. If you earn better in another place, that's another thing. And the third thing is parnasa, for livelihood. You're allowed to go somewhere else if livelihood is better, right? I think it's easier or whatever. Yeah. Now, Rebbe brought up a fourth case the Gemara doesn't mention, right? He was living in Israel, and he went to the Brisker Rov, Yisrael Zev Salvation Blessed Memory. And he went to see the Brisker Rov, and he was the son of Rav Chaim Brisker, again, a Torah giant. Yeah, according to everybody. And they went to get a blessing because he was going to go. He was leaving Israel for a short amount of time. So the Brisker asked him, why do you think it's permissible to leave? Like, what's your excuse? You have to have a good excuse to leave, right? So he said, "Kibbutz, gotta go visit my mother." Right? His mother was a widow. She was a widow for 57 years. Her husband died when, she was raising 11 kids. And she was 35 or 37, I think. And Mary was only like 8 or 9 years old, I think, when, or 7 or 8 when he died. So he said, I'm going to go see my mother. Kibbutz. So the Brisker Rov said, okay, we'll take that. That's good. Right? That works. Now, as my Rebbe had mentioned, that's not part of the three that the Gemara mentioned. Gemara mentioned, to get married. The Gemara mentioned livelihood. The Gemara mentioned, what was the third one? Learning. If you learn better, you're going to leave Israel if you learn better somewhere else. Right? This wasn't one of them. But obviously the Brisker Rov said that's good enough. Right? He added that to the list. Right? Now, what if a person, we have this discussion, a person needs a vacation. Okay. Or even better, even before we get to that. Yeah. They want to see God's wonders in the world. They want to go to Switzerland, get a bit of a breather, so to speak. They want to see the Alps. They want to go see the Alps. Yeah. Not to mention relaxation, other things, but see God's wonder. It's an obligation to travel around the world to see God's wonder. God's wonder. I have to travel America to see the Grand Canyon. The Niagara Falls. Yeah, let's see. It's an unbelievable wonder. It's true. There are people that go visit it. Right? But I'm saying, so if you live in America, you live other places, you want to go see. It's one thing. You live in the land of Israel, am I allowed to go? Right? Not so simple. Not so simple. I can say, but it's one of God's creation. I want to praise God for that creation. Right? Anyone's ever seen the Grand Canyon, in the state, it's an unbelievable thing. I got to see it in a plane. Saw it one of these 8-10 passenger, 10-passenger planes. I got, I didn't pass out or get sick from it. But in either case, I mean, it was unbelievable to see. Right? It's no that's no question. The question is, you have an obligation. I have an obligation to leave the land, to leave the holiness of the land, and to go see these sites. Right? That's one question. The second question is, what about just you need a break? Right? Person that just, in Israel, no matter where you go, it's expensive. Right? Go to a hotel, go other places, expensive. So people go, what I think so many Israelis travel to Turkey. I don't know if they're trying so much to Turkey now, with all the anti-Semitism and other things, but in Turkey, Greece, some other places, cheap, right? First of all, it's not so far, right? It's not so far a plane, right? And second of all, it's cheap. Compared to Israeli prices, it's cheap. It's very cheap, right? So a lot of times people travel there. Yeah. So again, it's two questions. One is the person lives in the land. You don't have to travel. You don't have to travel to see, let's say, greatness of God's creation, right? And right, if it's not that, just because you need R&R, right? You need a little bit of relaxation. So a person goes, I don't know, go to Italy, they go to Switzerland, they go to the States, they go, I don't know, or where do Israelis travel? Also Thailand. Thailand's also pretty cheap. Yeah, but it's further, right? It's a lot further. So whatever, you go somewhere because you want to go see the place. Yeah, those are two questions. So first question is, would you have an obligation to do such a thing? You want to go to the Alps. You want to go to, I don't know, any of the seven wonders, seven great wonders, whatever. That the world calls seven wonders. I have an obligation to go to any of these places. I have an obligation to see like Mount Everest, just to see it. I'm not talking about climbing. I'm just to see it. One of God's great creations. Yeah, or certain dams. I don't know, whatever. They're an obligation. If there are Jewish things going on, there's one thing. Yeah, you want to see an old Jewish community, whatever. If you go to Rhodes, you used to go to Rhodes, see what, old Jewish artifacts there, go other places. Okay, maybe, you see part of the Jewish community, whatever. Again, there are a lot of people today, it's more of a, talking about this someone recently about going to Poland. Yeah, go to Auschwitz, go to these places, become a tourist travel, also. But, to go see the camps, right? People want to go on these type of missions, or you may see advertised people go to what they call Kivrei Tzaddikim. They go to the righteous people's graves. Like some people go to Budapest, certain righteous people buried there. Other places. Or going, you go through Europe, go through France, go through Italy, go through Spain, some other places, go visit the Jewish communities there, right? So again, that would be probably part of the second question. The first question, let's go back to the first question. Yeah, first question is to see places, see God's wonder. Forget about the Jewish community. See God's wonders of the world. Yeah, I don't know, mountains, other things, whatever it may be. It's going to give a person this impression of God's greatness in the world. To see, you see Niagara Falls, right? You see the Golden Gate Bridge. I don't know. You see the Alps. Right? A person goes to France, sees the Eiffel Tower. Yeah, you see God's, okay, man made it, very good. But I'm saying it doesn't have to be necessarily, it's a God created thing. It could be a man-made thing also. But either case, right? Either case, is there an obligation to see things because you're going to praise God for it? No obligation. There is no obligation to do such a thing. Now, if a person wanted to, okay, so that gets to the second question, right? Really gets part of the second question. The second question is, let's say you want to see part of God's creation, but part of it also is, see different parts of the world, travel, whatever. Very good. Yeah. So that we're going to be much more lenient on if a person needs it, right? And today, you can say a person may need it. They may need to leave just to, get away from everything, if you can, as long as flights are leaving here, no wars or whatever. But, in general, right? In general, is that a good thing? So yeah, if a person needs it, they should say it's okay. What if let's say we'll make it a little more generic. What if a person, doesn't matter where they live? Yeah, they need to go on vacation. They want to go somewhere, wherever they want to go. Yeah, but they need just to get away from where they are. So I want to go for a week, 10 days, less, whatever it is. Clear their minds, see a different place, experience different things. Obviously, talking about things that are permissible, right? So again, would that be? We're talking about leaving the land of Israel to do such a thing. What about doing it in general? You don't live in the land. Yeah, you don't live in the land. A person lives in the States. They want to see, I don't know, they want to go see France. They want to go see England. They want to go see Thailand. I don't know. They want to go to China. They want to go to Australia. Yeah, they want to, hang out with kangaroos. I don't know. Whatever they want to do. Whatever they want to do. So that one can be much more lenient. Yeah, if there's a need. So you say in this generation, there's a need. Right? The person has the money. Say, but you can use the money for other things, give more to charity. Yeah, the person needs to get out. They feel they need to get out. Right? They're, going through quote unquote a monotonous life. They need whatever you need change. Even just a change of scenery. Even just a change of scenery. So again, if there's nothing forbidden, if there's nothing forbidden per se, so a person needs it, they need it. But there becomes the question, going to places, this would be more for a guy than for a woman. In general, person goes somewhere, you gotta pray, right? You gotta pray with 10 men. So yeah, 3 times a day. So you have these trips, not cheap, certainly not cheap, kosher trips, and they provide all that. Right? You have enough people to pray with and do everything that you need to do also. So very good. But what if a person doesn't do that? They just go I don't know, they go hiking in the middle of nowhere, a whole bunch of days. What do you do about Shabbos? What do you do about kashrus? What do you do other things? There's stories. I mentioned this before, but I'll just mention it again. There are stories that people have done this. They it took their families, let's say, 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever. So they had younger kids. So it's easier. And they go to different countries. They go to different countries, they travel around, they hike, to this, to that. Right. So yeah, Shabbos becomes an issue. Prayer obviously becomes an issue. But the overwhelming question that always comes up when I see any of these things, right? A lot of times, the kids aren't so young. So what do you do about educating them? That's one thing. Right. You take 2 years off because, you got this thing in your head because you want to see the world, or live in a certain country or whatever. So that negates kids' education. I mean, it's kind of a problem. Right, that's definitely a problem. On the other hand, let's say you don't have that problem. Yeah, let's say you don't have that problem. But what about prayer? What do you do about prayer? I remember someone once, thinking about, let's say 2 weeks, 3 weeks, in the summer traveling cross country, right, in the States. There is stuff, different places, whatever, very good. Right. And so what do you do about a minyan? Yeah. And you gotta go somewhere for Shabbos, okay, but what do you do about a minyan 3 times a day? That was it. That was the deal killer right there. Yeah. But again, I'll tell you the truth. There are people that would do it even if they can't pray 3 times a day with a minyan. If they want to go, they feel they need it, whatever. Who says you're allowed to put yourself in that situation? I've seen people do it. I've heard about it. Read stories about it. Okay. That means right. Definitely doesn't mean it right. It's right. Right. And, the other issue you could say, even about religious magazines, why would you put that as a story? It's an interesting story. It's a very, very interesting story. What people see, what they encountered, different things, and how it was family wise with their kids. I get it. Yeah, I get it. It's an interesting story. It's an off the beaten track story. Very, no pun intended. Off the beaten track. Totally off the beaten track. Yeah, but that's not something we want to advocate, right? And there were people wrote into the editor and said, it's an interesting story, very good, but how can they do it to the family? How can they do that with prayer, with other things? Same thing I just said. Yeah. So, someone wrote it. I was like, oh, I said, I'm glad, someone had the same intention. I was going to write it in, but whatever. Someone said a similar thing. Not only that, I can advocate, you have let's say, advertisements, going to like Mexico for, Sukkot or for Passover or any of these other, fancy vacations. Right? There's a whole question how you can advertise for that, also. But But here, you write a whole story. I mean, it's an interesting story. Not going to say no. It's an interesting story. Yeah, but what happens though? At the same time, they're telling the story. They're not telling anyone to do this. They're telling the story. But as you read the story, it becomes very clear. You got nowhere to pray. And maybe you have some conscious issues. Maybe some of these things are taken care of. Prayer is going to be a problem in a lot of these places. Definitely going to be a problem. Prayer is a major thing. You tell me, someone will tell me, well, we'll cut some people some slack, right? And the slack is that what's my obligation to pray? There's in general, there's a Torah obligation to pray, right? A Torah obligation to say, to praise God. That's the Torah obligation. Yeah. If somebody, praises God once a day, that's the obligation. That is the obligation. Now, everything else is rabbinical. What I say, when I say it, how many times I say it, it's all rabbinical. Yeah, so a person can say, okay, I'm going to pray. It's not like I'm not going to pray. Everything else is rabbinical. But yeah, there's one caveat. What's the caveat? The caveat is you got to listen to what the rabbi's telling you. That's it. And they're not going to tell you to do this. They're absolutely not going to tell you to do this. Right? Someone asked me last week in a Q&A what I thought of Breslau. So I said, if they're holding, by the mainstream, Torah mitzvahs, keeping what they need to keep. They want to learn more of what Rav Nachman said and all that. Very good. They want to sing and dance more. Okay. They want to go meditate, in the forest, for an hour a day, an hour a week, 2 hours a week. Okay. I don't even have a problem with that. Right. But remember, it does not negate the fact of having an obligation to pray 3 times a day. Right? With 10 minutes. Now, if you're going to do whatever you want, then you're going to think, oh, that's my service to God or whatever, and I'm going to blow up what the rabbi say, that's a problem. That's a serious problem. Yeah, definitely a serious problem. So again, you want to sing and dance as much as you want, but don't forget what the most important thing is. Right? You can't go against what you're supposed to do. You got to listen to the rabbis, what they tell you to do. That's the bottom line. Right? That is the bottom line. So in this case, someone goes to some foreign country somewhere. They have this, drive around to Winnebago and who knows what. They travel around. Let's say they get around kashrus and other issues. This issue you're not going to get around. This issue is going to be a problem. We say, well, for Shabbos they're somewhere, for festivals they go somewhere. They plan that out. Very good. Yeah, what about during the week? That's a question, even though Bob Sherebi never, said anything about this, seemingly. He sent people to very far-flung places all over the world to do outreach. Now, they're in these places. They haven't even been yonim around them. They don't have anywhere to pray, right? A lot of these places. But he sent them there anyway, right? To build them, okay. To be a pioneer. So again, you got little kids. It's one thing. They have all infrastructure. When kids get a certain age, they send them out. They can't leave them there. They don't have an infrastructure. They don't have a school. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but they send them out usually at a young ages, a relatively young age, because they have a huge network. How can you do that? Again, far from me to go against the Lubavitcher Rebbe there. I have a lot of respect for Chabad and what they do. Tremendous amount of respect for what they do. Yeah, but at the same time, they're being sacrificed also to a certain point. Yeah, prayer is important. It's not my Hasidic side here coming out. It's important. Yeah, every day. So you say, well, God's going to end my prayer. Either way, if I pray with 10 men or I don't pray with 10 men. Okay. Well, what's my obligation? So how can you put yourself in that type of situation? So if a person, let's say for business, had to go somewhere, in the middle of nowhere, you got no choice. That you have no choice. Yeah, there for a few days, maybe a week, whatever. What happens? No Jewish community. So spend Shabbat by yourself. That's what you do. You don't have a choice. But to put yourself in that situation, maybe some people say doing kibbutz is more important than anything else. God's going to protect them from all the other influences. Very good. I don't have a problem with that. What do you do about this? You know, is someone going to answer? And it could be that that's the answer, that this is more important. And eventually build a community so you don't have a problem. But what do you do at the beginning? What do you do at the beginning? So lonely existence being the only one. So you tell me if you start something, whatever, it's kind of like field of dreams. You build it, they will come. Okay. That's one thing, right? Field of dreams, moving, you can Google it, right? You build it, they'll come. Okay. That I could hear. To a point. I was in Florida a couple years ago, and I was I went somewhere to pray the evening service, Dove and Mara, and they didn't get a meeting. Now, this Chabad rabbi has been there for in this area, they've been there for 20 years, more than 20 years. Yeah. Now, a lot of times, they might not get them in during the week or at night or, whatever. Been there for 20 years. 20 years. Again, you can tell me there are more Chabad places around there. Maybe some take from others. Whatever, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. What do you think? If someone's been there, I'm not blaming the person. I'm just saying. You would think if someone's been there for 20 years, you got enough people. You should have enough people to draw from. Again, it depends on the place. It depends on the place. Now, again, if you're starting out in a place like that, there are obvious questions. How can you do that? You say, but the Rebbe saw further than that, and obviously he thought that was more important, right? To, bring back as many Jews as possible, even at that cost. Not going to pray with 10 men. You're going to say, okay, so you won't pray with 10 men, right? Maybe you only do it once a week. And it's not so simple. Prayer is a vital thing. It's not so simple. Yeah. But again, I may never reach Lubavitcher Rebbe's toenails in 10 lifetimes. Yeah, for what he accomplished, what he did, and and his knowledge, his vast knowledge. Okay. Yeah. I'm just asking a question. How can you do that? Yeah. And the question would be someone goes off the beaten track for a couple of years, or 6 months, or whatever, knowing that's what you're gonna do. Now, if you go visit a place, let's say doing the visit, you visit a parent, yeah? You visit a parent, you're there for 3 days, 4 days. There's nowhere around to pray. Yeah. Does the mitzvah of honoring a parent trump that? Yes. That will trump that. Yeah. Okay, so you have an obligation to pray, but what can you do? You're in the middle of nowhere, right? Let's say you have nowhere to pray. What are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do? You say, oh, yeah, mom, dad, sorry. Yeah, I can't come because I have nowhere to pray. No, you say you have to pray by yourself. You don't have a choice. You do not have a choice. Now, the question is why you're there. But that doesn't even matter. You're there to visit. Or let's say they're, the convalescing. They just came out, an operation. You need to be there. You need to help them out. Okay, that, Or let's say God forbid someone's sick. You're in the hospital. Right? Yeah, somewhere not in a Jewish area. You're in the hospital. What are you going to do? You got to pray there. You're stuck. So if you get stuck, you get stuck. Okay. Yeah, putting yourself in that situation is a different thing. But again, there are certain things that could trump that, right? Taking care of a parent could trump that. Yeah. If you can do both, very good. If you can't, taking care of a parent takes first. Unless you get someone else to do it. Yeah. Yeah, but if you can't get someone else to do it, it doesn't work out. So you have to do it. Right? You don't have a choice. You definitely don't have a choice. Yeah, the halacha is, by the way, let's say, just while we're on this, if a person, let's say went to visit a parent. Yeah, and they live in a place. Let's say they get a minion once a day. They get a minion, let's say, in the morning, but they don't get a minion at night. Where's the next minion? Where's the next closest place you could go? So let's say the next closest place is 40 minutes away. Now, you could go there, right? You have a car, let's say. But if you don't have a car, then, you'll have to take an Uber and go both ways and, break the bank. No. That far, you don't have to go. Let's say you have a car. Rented a car, borrowed a car, whatever it is. Yeah, let's say. And even better, you drive. We'll make it easy. We'll make it very easy. Yeah. So if I didn't drive or I didn't have a car, taking an Uber, it's going to be very expensive. I don't have to do that. Then I don't have to go so far. Yeah. But what if I could? What if you had access to a car? Let's say you were renting a car either way. Yeah, you're renting a car. Very good. So I have an obligation 30, 40 minutes away to go. Right? So really, you're probably exempt. You don't have to go that far. You gotta say, but it's such an important mitzvah. Yeah. Person probably should. Right? But really, technically, you probably exempt. But again, you're in this situation, you're not in an ideal situation. Right? But again, let's say, parents are a good example. You go to visit parents. They live in the middle of nowhere. So there's nothing around for like hours, nothing to talk about. You're exempt. You got to pray, but you're exempt from going. If you're 20 minutes away, half an hour away, that's part of the day. In the afternoon, let's say people want to get together, whatever. So you go, sorry, I got to go pray. I'll be back in 2 hours. All right? Now the question is, you have an obligation to do that. So maybe you'll be exempt. Maybe actually, you would be exempt over here, right? But some people, obviously, if they take prayer really seriously, what are they going to do? They go out of the way to do it. They will go out of the way to do it, but really, you're exempt. So if there are other things that are more pressing, I don't have an obligation to go half an hour, 45 minutes. I don't have an obligation. Right? Now, should you do it with name Mishura Sadid? You go beyond the letter of the law. So again, it depends on a number of things. Right? But if it's going to take away from other things, you probably don't have an obligation. Right? But so for certain things I can understand, you're in a situation because you have to be. Yeah, and you have other obligations. Okay. The question is, but you're not in that situation. You put yourself in that situation. Right? Are you allowed to do such a thing? Now again, you see what Chabad does. They're in that situation many times. For many years. I spoke to someone a while ago, asking him different things. And one of them was, well, how long have you been there? The person's telling me it's a very small community, or it hasn't grown that much, whatever. He's been there, I don't know, 12 years. 12 years, 15 years. Something like that. And they barely get them in here once a week. Again, it's doing kiruv, the ultimate mitzvah that, it trumps prayer. I saw someone ask the question on college campus. Someone was doing kiruv on college campus, right? And someone had said that they're exempt, from, kiruv is more important than praying. Meaning, if I'm busy like learning with someone, whatever, I'm not going to take the time to pray. Not that they'll, they can't get to a minyan, they'll pray on their own. No, they went further. They went further and said, I don't have any obligation because this is a bigger mitzvah. That's totally not true. That 100% is totally not true. Saving a life, saving a soul, a spiritual soul for a Jew and bringing them back. Yeah, it's a huge mitzvah. Nothing to talk about. It's a huge mitzvah. But at the same time, I throw other mitzvahs out the window because that's more important. Who says that's more important? Anyone, involved in kiruv knows that. Again, unless you're in the middle of nowhere, you don't have a minyan anyway. So you still have to pray on your own. You still need that connection, right? And people out there in the field, and they're working with others, very good. But you have to have time to learn for yourself also. Because if you're only helping other people, very good, but you stunt your own spiritual growth as well. It's also another, potential knock on Chabad also. But they have to do it for themselves. They have to learn for themselves as well. I'm not saying they don't. Your schedule gets busy, there's that, and you're busy doing all these things. Okay, very good. It's a huge mitzvah, but it doesn't also come at the expense of learning Torah for yourself. You have obligations to have fixed time for Torah. It doesn't matter. Helping this one kasha their kitchen, helping this one learn Hebrew, helping someone else do something else. Very good. These are all good things. Right? But a person has to have their own learning. have their own fixed time to learn, because if you don't, right, then you stunt your own spiritual growth, and that's never good, right? So you have to have time for yourself. Doesn't matter how much time. You take half an hour, you take an hour, right? You take a certain amount of time, right? Because that's what you have to do, right? That's your obligation. Again, person get busy, person get sidetracked. Other things may trump this in certain ways, but you have an absolute obligation whatsoever, no matter where a person is, right? That fixed time to learn, right? Otherwise, how are you supposed to grow spiritually? So again, you can remember things that you learned before and other. It's not the same. It's not the same as you yourself are focused in, X learning. Right? Again, this applies more to men, I think, than to women, but women should also have fixed time to learn. Right? If they have more time, they should learn more. No reason not to. Learn more, do chesed, do other things. Very good. Yeah, a guy's got an obligation to learn as much as possible. Okay. What about a non-Jew? A non-Jew learns what they have an obligation to learn. They have to have fixed times to learn. They learn what they want when they want. Right? Much more, much more user-friendly, much more lenient. But they also have to learn. Right? Absolutely they have to learn. What they want to learn. People say, nah, I want to be a Jew and whatever, and I have all the obligations, very good. Right? But I always tell people, first of all, it's not a made-up thing, it's not a Christian thing. If someone wants to stay as a non-Jew, they can. They'll have a portion of the world to come. May not be exactly the same as a Jew. Jews got more obligations, very good, but they also have a portion of the world to come. So I always say, people say, wow, it's not so much to do, it's not so much ritual. I mean, it's true. There is less to do, right? But there's still plenty more to learn. Things that apply to them. Laws that apply to them. Going through Tanakh, right? Going through the Torah, the writings, prophets. Learning Musar, ethics, Jewish philosophy. I mean, there's plenty more to learn, right? As I've always said, I could be, if I would live another 250 years, God would give me 250 years, plenty more to learn. Plenty more to learn as an Anj. And it can be, plenty intense also. Not just listening about, not going as in depth as Jews do for other things. Okay, but there's depth for a non-Jew also to what they need, to what they need to learn also. But in either case, there's no mitzvah whatsoever to stunt a person's growth. Stunt their spiritual growth. Right? You have to learn. Right? You have an obligation to learn. You have an obligation to reach whatever potential, that we have. And nobody knows what their potential is. Right? Nobody knows. I was talking to someone this morning, this story. Famous story with the Netziv. The Netziv was the head of the yeshiva of Volozhin after Chaim of Volozhin. Chaim of Volozhin, famous student of the Vilna Gaon, Rabbi Elijah Vilna, and the Netziv was known as Rabbi Naftali Tzvi. Berliner was from Berlin, right? So an acronym, the Netziv. And he, whatever, he's a rambunctious kid, didn't like to learn and whatever, gave his parents a lot of problems. And he overheard his parents once saying that, didn't know what was going to be with him, right? Wasn't learning well, wasn't doing very much. And they decided, they're gonna find him a profession. They give him an apprenticeship somewhere, I don't know. Find him some sort of profession. He's not gonna amount to anything anyway, he's not learning anyway. So okay, so he's should have a parnosa, right? Should be able to, have livelihood. Very good. So what happened that night? He goes to sleep. Then the thief goes to sleep, and he has a dream. And what is the dream? He sees a big scale, right? And he sees he's being judged in the heavenly court. Now, you can ask the question, it's a child, right? How can he be judged in the heavenly court? Good question. But in either case, they say bring out all his mitzvahs. So a lot of these, white angels come, some stronger, some weaker, right? Wagons and wagons of these angels come. For every mitzvah he's done, skill goes way down. It's feeling pretty good. Then he said, then he hears the heavenly voice, and the heavenly voice says, bring out all his transgressions. Bring out all his transgressions. So these black angels come out, some weaker, some stronger, go down the other side of the scale. The scale's going like this. He's getting a little bit nervous. And the black angels stop coming. And he's still feeling, okay. He still thinks he's doing okay. And then he hears another heavenly voice. And the other heavenly voice says, bring out all the books he was supposed to write. Comes out this big book called the Emek HaDavar. Emek HaDavar was the book he was supposed to write. Which we have today on Chumash. Emek HaShem was the whole thing on questions and answers, different things, right? All these big books come out and are going towards the scale of the side of the scale of sin, of transgression. So he screams out, he's like, what are these books? He's like, well, what are these? He says, oh, this is according to your potential right now, right? Because you're judged only what you're holding right now, right? These are the books in the future you're supposed to write, right? But because you're not going in that right direction, since you're not going in that right direction, you get judged now as if you didn't write them, and that's going to be transgression. And that went on the other side of the scale, and that was it. He woke up. That was a dream. That was a dream. So the Netziv, at that point, he wakes up, probably in a huge sweat or whatever. So goes to his parents, he's like, Mom, Dad, he's like, bring the Rebbe tomorrow. I'm ready. I'm ready to learn. And that dream spurred him in order to become as great as he was. Right? So now, a lot of questions on this dream, as we said before, but what's the main thing here? Person doesn't know what their potential is. We have no idea. We can't, we can never rest, on our laurels, so to speak. We always have room to grow. There's what to do. But at the end of the day, unreached potential is unreached potential. And if God thinks we have greater potential, we don't reach it, we're in trouble. So a person will say, well, I'm in trouble anyway, because, who says we're ever going to reach our potential? Good. Very good. Is there a minimal level? So the Ramchal in Derech Hashem says, a person has to reach a minimal level in order to have a portion of the world to come. Right? Jew or non-Jew. Right? It's not going to Jews, but non-Jews also have to do enough to have a portion of the world to come. Now, the Ramchal there does not give any definition. He doesn't say what level you have to reach, but he says there's a minimal level, right? There's a minimal level. And what happens if you reach the minimal level? You don't get there, right? You do not get there. Now, unreached potential, as we said before by Avram Avinu, had Avram not gone through the Akedah, he still had a legacy, huge legacy. Avram himself would not have reached the ultimate legacy had he not gone through the binding of Isaac. So I would have asked the question, God knows the thoughts of man. God knows the thoughts of man, give him credit. Give him credit, as if he did it. Right? That would have been my very simple answer. Yeah? What's the problem with my answer? The Ramban says not that way. The Ramban says unreached potential is unreached potential. You didn't do it. Right? You didn't reach it. Now, the question is, if I didn't reach that potential, and I had I had the opportunity to reach that potential, I was given, let's say not me, somebody was given the potential to reach a lot more what they're doing now. And let's say at some point they die. They didn't reach that potential. But God sees through the hearts of man, through the person's soul, what they could have done. See, that is a second movie. When a person dies, you see two movies, according to Kabbalah. One movie is, and everyone says this when they have an out-of-body experience, they see their life flash before their eyes very quickly. Everything they've done, every thought they've done, right? Just when you thought it was safe to read National Geographic in the bathroom, right? Think again. Okay, let's say. Yeah, so you saw, first movie is what you did in your life. So that you can never say anything against, because everything's being recorded, right? Just like we're recording now. Everything is being recorded. So you can't say I never did it. You can say, God says, well, I caught you with your hand in the cookie jar. No, you don't understand. You can't say it wasn't in the cookie jar. You were caught, yes. Right? So that's one thing. Right? Now, you might give an excuse why. God could say yay or nay, but the first movie is what you did. What's the second movie? The second movie is scarier. So says Kabbalah over here, the second movie is what my future potential was. Where I had to go through all the tests, what you should have done, where you succeeded, where you failed, etc. Right? But the second movie is what you could have been. Now, probably for most people, most likely, that potential probably not reached at some level. Maybe some people are closer to it, maybe some other people not. Doesn't really matter. Yeah. Bottom line, most people probably don't reach their potential. Don't reach at least the potential God thinks they should reach. Okay. So the $1 million question on the table is, if they didn't reach that potential, is that held against them? Yeah. What's the answer? Held against you. Why? Because you had that potential. Now, if there was no way for you to reach that potential, one thing, right? But God sees past, present, future. He knows what you can do. He knows what you're capable of. He's not going to punish you for something you could not have done. Right? We may go through certain trials where we think, it's impossible for us to overcome, right? God never put the person in a situation they can't handle. Now, we may say, we can't handle it. It's too hard, whatever. But obviously, God put you in the situation for a reason, right? Or you did it to yourself. But again, it's a question of, what you're going to do. Are you going to react, right? And all that. So even though we don't, we may think it's impossible, this situation, whatever it is, God never puts a person in situations that are going to, there's no possible way they can overcome it, right? Because, some people may say, you know what? It's only a question of how far are you going to fall. Well, who says it has to be that way? It doesn't have to be that way, right? We may think we can't overcome it, right? But obviously God put us in the situation so we can't overcome it, right? We may just think, it's very hard, it's impossible. So now, so the question is, you didn't reach that potential. Now, God in his infinite wisdom says you could have. You're lazy, you didn't use other things, whatever. Right? Now, if God thinks you could reach that potential, that's the answer. In other words, that's something you're lacking. Now, if that's something you're lacking, so you're going to pay a price for that because there's a lot more you could have done. Right? Now, a person can say, come on, how many people end up reaching their ultimate potential? Maybe some do. Right? But don't some people lack at some level? Right? At some level. We'll look at Moshe Rabbeinu. Right? Let's look at Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, it's brought down that he reached the 48th level of knowledge. 48th level of knowledge. Now, to reach perfection, there are 49 levels of knowledge. He had 48. What about the last one? Is he punished for not reaching the last one? If no one's able to reach the last one, not even Moshe Rabbeinu, there's no punishment. That would not be a punishment because no one's supposed to reach that level. But if he had the ability to and he didn't, that's a lack in some way. That would be a lack in some way. So therefore, for us, what's a simple explanation? Simple explanation is if God saw we had greater potential and we wasted it or we didn't use it or whatever, what happens? You pay a price for it. That's the second movie. And that's the reason the second movie is much more painful. Much more painful. Why? Because the person will say, give me another chance. Give me another opportunity. Send me back so I can fix it up. Now, we are, most likely, we are all reincarnated souls. So if we're reincarnated souls, it's probably the last time while we're here in this world. The soul is in the last time last time in this world. So for the soul itself, it's been here before, and now it's here to fix up whatever it's supposed to fix up. Yeah, but it's probably not coming back. But what could happen previously is maybe God gives the soul an opportunity. So listen, you didn't reach this, you didn't do that, you didn't do the other thing. I'll give you a choice. You got enough to go to Gehenna to get fixed up, to have your soul spiritually rectified. That's what Gehenna is, right? To get your soul spiritually rectified. You go through a lot of pain, but in the end, something will be left. You have a portion of the world to come. That's one option. But you end up suffering a lot. Second option is, I can put you back in another body, give you another chance. Now, obviously, it depends on the soul. Some, if they're given another chance, some souls may say, no, I'll take the pain. You give me all the pain, I don't want to go back. I want to be in this spiritual world. Yeah. Other souls may say, no, you know what? I'm not interested in pain. I understand what the pain could be. No, I'm not interested. Send me back. Yeah, but again, the soul will not know what it's doing here, what it's here to fix. Right? Now, I have heard, in other words, we will not know what we've done in previous lives. Now, I don't know how this works because it seems like a contradiction. Right? Now that if you've been under deep regression, deep hypnosis, what they call regression. There are people that can recount things that happened to them previously. Now, according to Kabbalah, that should never be able to happen. One of my rabbis, blessed memory, very much states in Kabbalah, told me, according to Kabbalah, it's impossible in this world. A soul will never know what it's doing here to fix. So it could be it's not a contradiction because it's not telling you what to fix, it's telling you of a past life, what you went through in a past life. Could be. Yeah. But in general, according to Kabbalah, the very little that I know, as this rabbi told me, it's impossible. It's impossible in this world to know what happened before, right? No such thing as deja vu. We don't know. A person may feel they're in a place, maybe I've been there before, maybe not. We don't, soul's not going to recognize it while it's in the body. At the same time, what do I have over here? You have so the soul, again, will never recognize this. So the soul itself, now what could happen is that maybe, again, I'm not saying this is the explanation, but it could be if the person's awake, the soul will never know anything about a past life, right? The person themselves will never know anything about a past life, right? A past life experience. Now, that being the case, what happens if the person's unconscious? If the person is unconscious, maybe they could speak about a past life. Yeah, after, under deep hypnosis, maybe. Right? One of my rabbis, again, told me that shouldn't be the case. Should not be the case. But there are cases, right? According to Kabbalah, that should not be the case. Right? But there are cases. There are cases where people have talked about past life experiences under deep hypnosis. Now, the question is, is regression a real thing? Because someone would be prompted, there are cases not that way, but according to Kabbalah, it should not happen. Yeah, so simple answer is, will you be judged for not reaching certain potential? Sure. That'll be negative. That'll be negative on the person. Because it's potential they had the opportunity to reach. If it's potential they never had an opportunity to reach, that's a different issue. That's a totally different issue. Yeah. If it's something they could have done and God sees as infinite wisdom that a person could have done that and they don't, yeah, that is taken as a major negative. And because it's taken as a major negative, then it's taken as transgression. What's the best way to know what our potential should be? Is it plain for each and every one of us? The first, let's answer like this. Nobody knows what their true potential is. Someone explained to me, and again, I'm not saying this is absolute fact, but someone once explained to me that reaching whatever that potential is, or fixing up, everyone's like a messenger in this world. They got something God gave them as a message to do in the world, but when we were born, we don't, when the angel like smacks us, we forget all the Torah that we learned. Nobody's going to remember. Nobody's going to remember. So someone once explained to me that it could be, again, I'm not saying this is 100% the truth, but it could be, think about, if we're trying to, figure out what we're supposed to be here fixing up. Yeah. Why God sent us here. Yeah, in the first place. What we need essentially to fix. So it could be, think of the hardest thing for you to do. The most difficult thing for you to do, meaning you'd rather, slit your eyeballs with glass before you do it. Yeah, you don't like to say thank you to people. You don't want to be beholden to people. That for you is like the kiss of death. You never want to do that. I don't know. Whatever it is, someone did a favor, you don't want to, show gratitude. Something very, very hard for a person to do. Not impossible, but very, very hard. It could be that's what you're doing here to fix. Could be. I'm not saying it is. Right? It could be. So now, what's the best way to reach our potential? We don't know what our potential is. Nobody knows what their potential is. But at the end of the day, what's my obligation? At the end of the day, I got to work like a dog to keep what God wants me to keep, no matter what. As much effort as I can put in doing that helps me reach the potential. Right? But a person can be put in all kinds of situations where, a person will say, well, this is impossible, whatever, and a person's able to overcome, a very, very hard situation. All these things, it's either going to make you or break you, right? But hopefully what it should do is give a person a high awareness, make them work harder, so to speak, right? And use things, inside themselves they never thought were possible. Yeah, never thought possible. Right? And sometimes in order to extract that, God has to put a person in a certain situation in order to have you, come up with certain character traits that you never would have had, you never would have gone through had you not gone through this thing. And it's, kind of hard for some people because a person will say, well, I've had this difficulty, that difficulty, like some things seem unbearable. But even the things that seem unbearable, what happens? It forms who we are, defines who we are. Yeah, it makes us who we are. We never would have, become the people we became if we had not gone through X, Y, or Z. Now, a person would say, I would have rather not gone through it. Okay. We can all be a Monday morning quarterback and say that. But at the end of the day, we did go through it. It was a hardship, but it formed who we are. So that was the way God did it. Why did he do it that way, not other ways? Can't answer. But he thought that was the best way to get some, let's say there's some dormant character trait a person has, the way they're going on in life right now, they're not going to reach it. And God needs that for whatever he needs it for in the world. So now God has to come up with a plan to bring that out. How is he going to bring that out? A million different ways. Yeah, probably a million different ways, which we never thought of. We never would have thought of in 10 lifetimes. Okay. Yeah, but he can do it that way. Is it in plain sight for all of us? Everyone according to their level. Some people go through hardship. They're able to overcome it. They're able to help, others because of the hardship, right? Because of the hardship that they went through. Yeah, but at the same time, it's a hardship for them. It's a very big hardship, but there are times we go through difficulty, we go through difficulty in life, right? And that difficulty gives us the ability to help others because we went through the difficulty. Yeah. So in that sense, yeah. And a lot of people actually understand that and they go into certain fields because of what they themselves went through. Right. Whatever it may be. So yeah, in some ways it is in plain sight because God gave everyone the ability to be able to help others, right? Certain character traits, the do things in this world. Very good. That so in that sense, a person has certain gifts. Obviously, the other people don't. Everyone's different. But you can use that to do other things that certainly helps the person reach their potential. So everybody knows something they're good at. Now, dollars and cents wise doesn't mean you're going to make money from it. That's not the point, right? The point is to utilize what you have to be able to give to others. Now, is that in plain sense everyone could figure out? Probably people know what their strengths are. We definitely know what our weaknesses are, right? But we should know what our strengths are. That's why the Holy says in Sharp Tough on the gate of faith and belief in God, he says that we should use that, whatever we're good at, we should use that for our livelihood. Now, it doesn't always mean you're going to make money from it, right? But he basically says you want to stick to what you're good at. Yeah, because if you don't stick to what you're good at, you'll be miserable. You say, I'm wasting my time, wasting my talent, different things, which may be true. But sometimes you may have to do certain things you don't want to do because you have to make money. Even something stupid. Okay. A person do whatever it takes. Right? You go out of your comfort zone a little bit. Okay. But in general, you shouldn't do that. Unless you absolutely have to. Why not? Because you won't enjoy it. You won't utilize your best assets. Right? And therefore you won't be happy because you're not using that. You're not using the gifts that God gave you. And someone says if you're in an environment, then we're supposed to make the most of it 100%. 100%. Not easy. Person can be in a hostile environment, negative environment. Right? The question is, okay, that's also a test. 100% also it's Mishna test. Right? How do we know the correct action to take? Again, what does evil inclination do? Makes us make bad decisions. Yeah, makes us, as I was telling someone earlier, what's the strength of the evil inclination? The strength of the evil inclination is to put doubts in a person. That's what it wanted to do, as we spoke about at the beginning. That's what it wanted to do to Abraham, to get him to speak negatively about what God had done because his wife died. Now, obviously, Abraham realized if I do that, I'm going to lose all the merit I got. Yeah? But the evil inclination said, see, look what you did. God told you to do this. How could God tell you to do that? It caused your wife to die. Most important person to you, caused your wife to die. Yeah. What does that do to a person? It can break them for sure, right? But what can it do? Make you second guess. Now he had a direct command. He's going to do it anyway, right? It's regardless, right? Abraham was going to do what God told him to do. Okay. But what's the end result? The end result is his wife died through it. The messenger came, but didn't say that Isaac survived. And it was too much for her, whatever it was. It's a whole question about that, and she died. Right? She died. So one of the lessons you learn is you're going to, you tell a story, or you tell a dramatic story to somebody, you got to tell them, at the beginning, you got to tell them, it all ends okay. Because if you don't tell them that, you tell them the story and they get all caught up. They could die of a heart attack. Yeah, they could absolutely die of a heart attack. So they have to know how to tell a story also. Right? How do we know the correct action to take? That's the $3 million question. How do we know? So some people would say, you go with your gut feeling. Your gut feeling's not always right. Right? What your gut is telling you does not mean that's what your mind is telling you. Your heart might be telling you one thing, but that might be a contradiction between the heart and the brain, because the heart really wants to believe it. The heart really wants this thing, to happen, right? But the brain, knows better. So going after your gut, sometimes it's good. I'm not, some people would say it's always good. You always go according to your gut instinct. Gut instinct might not be right. May not be right. Could be. May not be right. Right? How do we know we're taking the correct action. It's all about patience or saying no or abandoning what the correct answer is. Sometimes you don't know what the correct answer is. Sometimes you are taking a risk, right? But I would say you got, like anything else. If you purchase, let's say, a car, you purchase a house, you're not going to purchase it on a whim, right? You're going to look into it, let's say a house or an apartment. You're going to look into it. You're going to see the value is, you're getting the most value. Is it, what are the neighbors like? What's the neighborhood like? What's the structure like? I mean, you're not going to make a major investment unless you look into it, right? And you're going to take it from all angles, and then you're going to have to make a decision. So then the question is, how do I know it's the right decision? You don't know 100%. Person may think they're doing the right thing. It comes out wrong. A person, may look at this as, wrong, and it ends up turning right in other ways. We don't know for sure. You can't know anything for sure, right? Two things we are guaranteed in life: death and taxes, right? Not necessarily in that order. Those things are guaranteed. Are anything else guaranteed? Not guaranteed. You can make the most of an opportunity. It could be a flop. It could be an absolute flop. Now, it could be because you didn't research it enough. It could be you got gung-ho and you got blinded. It could be you got into something because evil inclination, took hold of you and everything looked good on paper, but there were certain things you were missing. And let's say it's something you couldn't have missed and you missed it. Then that means God wanted you to miss it. Yeah, so there's no guarantee, right? Certain things are going to work on our patients. Yes, 100%, right? Certain things, we have to evaluate. It's like anything else. I have to evaluate the good, the good and the bad, right? And I have to weight it, right? What's the most important thing in this decision? Yeah, I have to weight it. Is it worth 1? Is it worth 5? Is it worth 10? Right? What's the least important thing? Right? And I have to see. Then, then you have to, then you have to, calculate, calculate the score. It's also good. You can bounce ideas off someone else, someone, who knows, about these things. But again, that's also not a guarantee. Someone gave advice, they gave the right advice, and it doesn't turn out the greatest for the person. Someone goes to the rabbi, asks some advice. They gave the right advice, right? Let's say, based on the evidence, and all the evidence is in, they said this is the best thing. Yeah, but it doesn't turn out best. Yeah, now the question is, what, that mean, that they were wrong? Or does that mean they were wrong? Could be there are other repercussions, other things going on, or they're lacking information. Doesn't mean they're not, doesn't mean that, they're not fallible. At the same time, there are other factors involved. Let's say a person makes, quote unquote, the right decision. They make the right decision, but there's a disaster in other ways. Yeah. If it's things they could have expected, okay. So they realize they're taking a certain risk. If it's things they could not have expected, then then maybe a person got swindled. Well, why did they get swindled? Why did they get misled? Why did they get misled over here? Because God wanted to be misled. Or they just didn't look into it enough. They made their own mistake. Right? So it's hard to say. It's hard to say on one foot, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Not necessarily. Right? I mean, most situations are complicated. It's not, it's not a one size fits all. What's the bottom line? The bottom line is we got to put our best foot forward. That's the bottom line. You have to get hopefully good advice. Yeah, and whatever we do. But again, there's a big X factor. It's called God, right? Because God blesses it or He doesn't bless it. Yeah, if He doesn't bless it, it doesn't mean you got bad advice. It means, it just means that it wasn't meant to be. I've seen this a number of times. Why does God, show you certain things that doesn't go? Yeah, well, what's the reason it doesn't go? Because He doesn't want it to go. But I mentioned last week that a person's salvation comes in the blink of an eyelash, right? So even if it doesn't go, but doesn't it show that God could change a person's status or whatever, like overnight? Show it, yeah. It didn't go. Kind of like, here's the salami, psych, like I'm gonna take it back. Yeah. So why did He show it to you? Right? That's the question. Why did He show it to you? Yeah, to show you that things can change overnight without, without the blink of an eyelash. Right? Again, that's what I'd say on that. I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of follow up here. Does always come down to prayer and study overcoming the human nature. Prayer is important. Prayer, again, when it comes to prayer, you got to remember one thing: God can say yay or nay. He can say yay and it's bad for you. Yeah, he can say no and it's good for you. So, we have to pray. The most important thing to pray is that God gives us what we need according to Him, and also what we need, right? But you want to pray that God gives us what we need, in general, for our benefit. Prayer is very important. But again, you got to remember one thing: prayer doesn't mean you get it gets answered the way you think. You think you're going to get answered. Has to do with forgiveness. A person has a block. Let's say I was just reading a story about somebody that a week or 2 weeks before they're supposed to get married, the other side broke it off. And this person was heartbroken, absolutely heartbroken, and it ended up causing a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. And a year later, they met their future spouse. Yeah. So one of the things they were saying is, yeah, it was hard. I went through a terrible time, but I also wanted to write up a shtar mechila, a document of forgiveness for the person. In other words, if a person has, let's say, a vendetta, it's not good, right? You can't bear a grudge, that's forbidden. The person is deeply hurt, right? Let's say this person got jilted, totally got jilted. Yeah. Yeah. So they could be angry. Now, what could that cause? That could cause the other person to never get married, to never have children, right? It could cause any number of things. So what the person should do is not going to be easy to do. But what a person has an obligation to do, if that happened, is to write a document of forgiveness. So therefore, according to heaven, that other person doesn't suffer. Either not having children or not getting married or, any of these things. Forgiveness, person's, status in different ways could change overnight if they bear a grudge against someone. It's something very hard, right? Obviously, not something easy. Yeah, let's say someone did to them, and with a full heart, they pray to God and say, "I totally forgive them." Now, again, it has to be 100%. Can't be 50%. It has to be 100%. Something very, very hard. Let's say, yeah, forgiveness can play a huge role. Huge role. Also, I'm not saying it's easy. Yeah, we're very petty in general, but even something major. Even something major. Someone could forgive somebody for the damage that they were caused. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, famous head of the Shiva of Mir, many years ago, Jerusalem was getting bombed left and right. There was a 6-day war. I think it was during the 6-day war. And they were in a bomb shelter, missiles flying all over or whatever. And this woman stands up, and she suffered for many years. Her husband refused to give a bill of divorce. Family suffered. She suffered. Stands up to heaven, says, God, I forgive him. I forgive him for everything he's done. Full heart. When Rav Chaim Shmulevitz heard that, and he knew the plight of this woman, he knew that he said nothing bad's going to happen. He said nothing's going to happen to them. They were in this bomb shelter. Why? Because this woman went well beyond. Suffered tremendously for years. Humiliation, embarrassment, other things, right? From this spouse. And she says, I forgive him. Now, again, it's a very hard thing to do. Extremely hard thing to do. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz said on that, he said, I knew from that second that this is what this woman said. From that second, I knew there's nothing to fear. Since God is not going to harm them at all, because what this woman did was well beyond what her obligation was. Well beyond. Because she was willing to do that unbelievable self-sacrifice, right? So he said, I knew nothing bad was going to happen. Somebody asked, is it to recognize everything is not a mistake? Also, yeah. Yeah. In other words, we've got to see everything. Everything's divine providence. Someone did something to someone, right? God's sending you a message. Yeah, someone said something negative to you, God's sending you a message. It has to see everything through God's eyes, right? There are no coincidences, right? Heard someone once say there are meaningful coincidences. True. Yeah, nothing happens for no reason. There's nothing that's random. See, that's what Amalek brought to the world. Everything is random, right? There's nothing that's concrete. Everything is random, right? And that's the world we live in. Stuff happens, right? Right? So obviously we believe this divine providence. God runs the world. It's kind of hard sometimes to be able to see because we live in a world of Hester b'toch Hester panim, right? Hiddenness, certainly hiddenness within hiddenness. And that's very hard to see, right? But at the end of the day, he still runs the world. So yeah, love even the suffering, if we can do it. If it's possible, a person says, God, thank you very much. Even if I'm suffering, you're still good to me. You're still helping me. I still have food on the table. I'm not dying on the streets, and I got plenty of things to be thankful for. Even when a person suffers, even if you did it to yourself, right? You can ask God for, God to help you out. Yeah, even when it's hard, because there are a million things to be thankful for, even if we have hardship, right? Some people say nothing's good. Okay, can't be nothing. Person's breathing, that's good. Yeah, if you're relatively healthy, that's good. If the body works, that's beautiful. In most ways. If you have other difficulties, there's a lot to be thankful for. True, even when a person has hardships, right? But you got to remember, even through the hardship, there is going to be a silver lining, right? Yeshua Hashem Karafayim, right? The salvation of God comes the blink of an eyelash. But even with all that, even within all that, it's hard to see the good when you get beaten down in life. But there's a lot good to be seen, even when life is hard. Someone asked, could we actually speak up if you need help? Why not? Some people get embarrassed. There are different things. I mean, you go to someone that hopefully can help you. Why not? Some people don't like to rely on other people. Obviously it depends what it is, but speaking up certainly can do something. Yeah, a person has to suffer by themselves. Yeah, also if other people have gone through similar things, how they handle it, what they go through. They're I always say my own experiences, people should learn from all my mistakes. Yeah. It should, you learn from mistakes. So it could be how to make these mistakes, be able to tell other people. Yeah, and gain from the mistakes I made. But yeah, that's that's important. I mean, if I didn't have great rabbis behind me years ago, I would have fallen off the face of the map. They kept me together, they kept me strong. Yeah, they took me in, they helped me tremendously. No, a lot of gratitude, tremendous amount of gratitude. Yeah, it changed the way I think, changed the way I look at the world. It changed the way I deal with things in many ways. Yeah, so try, if I didn't have that, I had so many things going on at the same time. I'm not saying I'm special by any stretch. Everyone's got, everything to go through, but a lot of upheavals. And just because the person changes their life doesn't mean it's going to be easy. And that's a mistake also. I mentioned that last week, right? That's a big mistake. People think, yeah, I'm going to change my life, do what I'm supposed to do and everything's going to be smooth. Doesn't mean that. It means we're going to have trials and tribulations and let's try and overcome them. Right. But again, we're put in certain situations. Hopefully we can help others in the same situation. Yeah, but if someone needs help, why not? Why shouldn't they get help if they can? Why should that be the case? These challenges, by the way, as we said before, they make us who we are. They can break us. They can break us, they could make us depressed, in many different ways. Inclination very good at that. Doesn't need me to doesn't need me to agree, but at the same time, right? At the same time, I would say that that you live, you learn. And hopefully you don't make the same mistakes twice. But if someone can gain, someone can gain from your mistakes, or you can gain from, what other people went through, and they can help you along the way. It's huge. Like I said, I wouldn't be anywhere today without that. I still got a long way to go for a lot of things, but certainly in the beginning, it's told to me, and I'm sure it's told to other people also, like you have the strength of Avram Avinu, like, you fighting the entire world, so to speak. I'm like, I'm not Avram Avinu, not even close, but, myself was similar upon him. He gave us the ability to fight, go against, stand up to our trials and tribulations because of what he put into the world, right? But nobody wants to hear it, like, oh, I'm Avram Avinu, got much greater, potential. But when a person suffers, they go through hardship, they overcome it, they become strong. That's huge. Doesn't mean the evil inclination by any stretch. Doesn't mean the evil inclination, goes by the wayside. It's stronger. It does other things, right? Makes you trip up in other ways. Okay, right. But again, if I didn't have good people behind me years ago, sure, I had a lot of things. Now, a lot of those things are not struggle states. I get other struggles. Okay, but like you have everything thrown at you at once. It's like, you gotta, you look at the world very differently. Very, very differently. It's it's still hard. I'm not gonna say not, but it's not, the struggles do not become the same. Struggles I had when I was first married are not the same today at all. Right? Not even close. Yeah, but I'm not saying they're not struggles, right? They're still, certain struggles and whatever, but I'm in a totally different place. So, but those struggles are easy to deal with, much easier to deal with, but person goes through the hardship, whatever it is. But, again, if I didn't have good people behind me, yeah, it would have been, it would have been a lot more difficult. Well, and not only that, but even the advice I got, which I'm not saying was bad advice at all, but it didn't make me come out smelling like a rose, which I mentioned many times. So, like, care less what people say. Not worried what people say. I did what I had to do, right? I got to say I listen 100% all the time. Whatever, I did what I needed to do. Wasn't pleasant. Got a lot of flack, a lot of different things, but, my mother would say, go eat kugel, you don't like it. Okay. So I just got to the point where, certain things I ain't gonna worry about. There's certain things, keep in mind, that there's nothing you can do about, right? And so you just have to move on from it. It's painful. It can be very painful. But you know what? There's nothing to do. There's certain things in my own life I'd love to change, I'd love to do something. I think about it for a split second, I move on. Like, there's no point, right? There's absolutely no point. So, to a certain extent, it's painful, but gotta live my life, gotta move on, right? Yeah, let me see. There are other questions here. So the evil inclination put a wall for potential convert. Sure. People think the hardest thing, is converting, right? The hardest thing is after conversion. People drop you like a hot potato. They stop inviting you for Shabbos. But yeah, you think a person, a potential convert has it easy? Not supposed to have it easy, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be impossible, but yeah, there are a lot of things. Family issues, livelihood issues, everything put together. Then they get health issues, different things. But yeah, they're going to go through hardship. God is going to weed them out. Who's going to be the real deal? Who's going to survive? Yeah. So they have a lot of trouble, a lot of difficulty. Yeah. So, God wants the cream of the crop. Whoever survives, less than 20%, right? Even they're accepted by rabbinical court, less than 20% finished. The process could be for a lot of reasons, a lot of different reasons. But yeah, there's hardship for a reason. There is hardship. A lot of things put in a person's way, right? And not everyone's made to convert in the first place, right? Everywhere a person goes, they say, they converted, or they're interested in conversion. They're going to get grilled. They're absolutely going to get grilled. They might get grilled also if they don't want to convert. They're going to say, why don't you just convert? Why do you want to stay in Ohio? Yeah. Yeah. So a person gets grilled. Yeah. And even after they convert, people may say, oh, who'd you convert through? Right? Even if you finished. Even if it's a rabbinical court, it's a reliable rabbinical court. People don't want to be judged all the time. I converted, like it's good enough. No, people want to know, like, who'd you go through? What happened? Different things. Okay. Yeah, but a person has to write. That's part of the process. You always have to prove things. Yeah, you always have to prove things. So like some sort of angel that would distract us or push us away. Yeah, it's called the evil inclination. That's the only angel that's going to make it hard, right? And that is the evil inclination. Yeah. So what do? You got to not care what the world thinks. You got to do what you need to do, right? Within the realm of Torah. And that's it. You got to put your best foot forward, and that's what you have to do. Sometimes you feel like getting nowhere. Sometimes the person may think there are all these obstacles, which they may be. But again, you have to have unbelievable intestinal fortitude. This will be the most important thing you'll ever do, in your life, and you have to make it that priority and do whatever it takes, right? No matter what the obstacles are. You got to, again, if this is not the most important thing in your life, you won't do it. You will not do it. It has to be the front of your mind, back of your mind at all times, right? At least until you finish. Because if not, you get distracted. Yeah. So how do you respond? That's what you do. You just keep going forward. I can tell me there were setbacks and different things. Okay, so what? Yeah, doesn't matter. If you really want it, like we said before, if you really want it, God will help you, right? But it's not gonna be easy. No one says it's gonna be easy by any stretch. So you just gotta persevere and keep going. You can say that's so easy, but I got so many obstacles. Okay. Now, maybe some obstacles you can't overcome. Yeah, maybe some are unovercomable. I don't know if that's a word. Yeah, meaning person has moved to Jewish community. Let's say they can't. Let's say it's impossible for them to move. That is the most important criteria. And if you can't move, you can't convert. That's it. Yeah. I had a question last week. If you live in a Winnebago, whatever, okay. But in general, let's say a person can't move. A rabbinical court won't deal with you. That's the hardest thing for most people. The hardest thing. Now, it's my fault I can't move, and I'm in this situation, it's not your fault. Right? If you could move and you could do it, yeah, then what happens? And you don't, might be held accountable. If it's total onus, it's one thing. Yeah, but if a person can't do it legitimately, God's not going to punish you for that, but you couldn't do it. Yeah, but you got to persevere. You just got to keep going, right? Right? That's what you have to do. You just have to keep going. Yeah. Let me see other questions. Do we take full responsibility? Or is God balancing it out? You got to take responsibility for your actions. Again, God's going to judge what you're holding right now, not future. Right? And you got to pray every day that He helps you in everything. God wouldn't help you in anything, in every last thing, you wouldn't be here. Yeah. You'd be on the street somewhere or dead. Right? So everything we rely on God for. Relying on for food, relying on for livelihood, relying on, for the sun, for the moon, for the stars, relying on for everything goes on in the body, all these things. Relying on 100%. Yeah. Although we suffer if it's by fault from past misdeeds, right? Right? It could be there's some things the person may get punished for because their soul has to go through it. It has nothing to do with what you've done. But for most things, yeah, it's things that we've done. And God's going to judge it. We're holding what we did, what our intention was, and all that. But yeah, a lot of things that happened to us are because of what we did. Someone asked, "Do I have to forgive those who are sorry?" You should. I would tell you should. If they're not sorry, do you have to forgive them? No. You want to pin me down? You do not have to forgive them. Lifting Mishur Sitin, beyond the letter of the law, you should. Yeah, if you overlook what someone did against you, even if they're not sorry, that probably take away a lot of sins. Is it possible? Depends what the person did. Depends what they did. But if you're going to forgive them, remember, even if they don't say they're sorry, right? Really, you don't have to. Yeah. So I'll tell you, someone told me, said, they quoted this thing in the Rambam, the law of repentance, sent me this whole thing. And they said, well, don't you hold what the Rambam says? Or Maimonides says? I said, yes. So why not in this case? Right? So the Rambam was saying, if you don't accept someone's forgiveness, you're considered cruel. Yeah, that's true. I said, I do believe that. They said, what about in this case? I'm not going to tell you what the case is, but they said, what about in this case? I said, did the person ask me for forgiveness? I thank God they didn't, because it would have been a hard thing to forgive. But did the person ask me for forgiveness? No. Now, I just answered my own question. Shouldn't I forgive him anyway? Yes. Should. Like I say, it's easy. Like I say, it's easy. Yeah. I'll take my own medicine. Forgive him. Yeah. 100%. But see, they tried to harp on me and say, see, this is what Maimonides says. You hold on Maimonides. I said, right. I said, but the person didn't ask for forgiveness. So I didn't tell them this part. Right? But in the end, if they would have asked for forgiveness, yeah, if you don't accept their forgiveness, then you're considered cruel. Now, again, it depends what they did. If they murdered your family, you have to give them forgiveness? No. Yeah. If they did some, someone was, I don't know, they went through certain trauma, whatever it is. They have to forgive? No. I'm not even saying it's beyond the letter of the law. They don't have to. They don't have to. Yeah. It's only caused someone damage. They have to. They should. I'm not saying it's easy. Right? If you went through trauma, you don't have to forgive. Yeah, that for sure you don't have to. Right? If someone did something else, you should. I'm not saying, you're gonna say, what if they're not sorry? Or what if they said it, they don't mean it? That's even worse. They say the words, but they don't mean it. So you can choose to accept it or not. You're asking me if they're not sorry. Should you accept it? Yes, you should. It's better to accept it. Do you have an obligation? No. You don't have an obligation. But I think it's better even if it's hard. Right? Say this person happily do horrible things to you again. Yeah. You don't have to forgive them. No. You don't have to forgive them. Something like Oliver Twist, turn the other, please, can I have some more? Smack. No. You don't have to go through that. Right? Even if they could do worse things or terrible things, I don't have to forgive them. You absolutely don't have to. Person offender has already died. So I knew this was coming. Yeah. Would you still be in your heart to forgive them? If you could. If you're able to. Yeah. If you're able to forgive them, you can forgive them. You can definitely forgive them. If it's too hard to forgive them for what they did, you don't have to. Depending what it is. Right? Depending what it is. At the end of the day, keep in mind, if you speak badly against someone that died, you have to send 10 people to the grave and ask forgiveness because they can't defend themselves. Right? So here, let's say they were alive, they wouldn't ask for forgiveness. Something they did really hurt you. So you don't have to forgive them. Depending what it is. If they're dead, you should try and forgive them. It's not easy to do, but you should. You should try and forgive them, if possible. Someone asked, sorry, getting late here. What's the best age for a parent to let the child grow up? I would say like this, that the older child gets, the less they listen to the parents in general. Doesn't mean you don't have to try and educate them. Right? My would say even when they're married, you got to try and educate them also. You got to be careful though when they're married. Right? But when they're younger, even before they're married, 18, 19, 20, in their 20s, still got an obligation to educate them to the best of your ability. Right? You don't stop educating your kids. You do whatever you can try and educate them. You don't want to alienate them, but there's no limit to education. My Rebbe would say, and I've heard him say it a number of times, even with the marriage, you have to educate them. That your obligation, once they get married, doesn't mean you don't have an obligation to educate them. Now, again, you have to know how, and you have to be careful because they're married or whatever. But at the same time, there's no limit. There's no age limit. When we pray, does it change the outer environment because it changes inwardly? It should, right? It should work both ways, right? It's why does my Rebbe say, I've heard him say this a number of times also, why does he say that when a person prays, they don't get their prayers answered? Because what's part of prayer, right, You have to entreat God. You have to beg. Literally, really, you have to beg. Moshe Rabbeinu, more than 500 prayers to let God let him into the land. Finally, God tells him stop praying, because if he would have prayed another one, God would have probably rescinded. But Moshe Rabbeinu understood, doesn't matter. God can have mercy, right? So even if you keep asking for the same thing over and over again, if it doesn't get answered, ask again. But again, why does a prayer not get answered in general? Right? People say because we don't beg. You gotta beg. You gotta be on your knees. I heard someone once say, I forget who said it, that what's the difference between this generation, previous generations? We have a book of slichus that we say either if you're Sephardic, the entire month of Elul, if you're Ashkenazic, 10 days before or a week before Rosh Hashanah. What's the difference between this generation and previous generations? Our slichus, those penitential prayers that we say, those books, they're totally dry. Probably still in good condition. Yeah. You look at someone from previous generation, tears all the way, all through it. Tears. Big difference. Big difference. It's hard for a person, today, even have shed like a little bit of tear on Tisha B'Av. That's the time to cry the most. You read some of these, heart-wrenching liturgical poems, But we're so far removed, right? That's what Marabi says. It's like you don't beg. You gotta beg. You absolutely have to be on your knees, not literally, but you have to beg. Yeah. You have to feel it. Your heart can't be hard as a rock. But again, when a person does that, in everything they do, they rely on God. Everything they do. I'm not saying you don't work, you don't do other things, but you say everything comes from you. You're the one in charge, right? I say this all the time. You're the one in charge. I can't do anything without you. Yeah. That's how you get things done. Yeah, you got to feel like you're on your knees. And sometimes we are all the time. You got to feel like that because God has to see it. It affects you. The more you say it, God's in charge, God's in charge, God's in charge. Yeah, it has an effect. 100% has an effect on your psyche. Yeah, that's what Rabbi said during Corona. He gave advice to people and said, you got to say at least 100 times a day. You run the world. God, you're in charge. You run the world. Yeah, nothing I can do without you. That is the mantra day in and day out, right? How can we tell if we're progressing? Simple. Think about where you're holding right now. Think about where you're holding a month ago, 6 months ago, 2 years ago. It shouldn't be the same. If you see this progression either way, so that's good. If you see you're on autopilot, you haven't really gained that much and you're still the same person, that's bad. Right? So that's how you can gauge. Right? That's how you can gauge. Is my intention in prayer any better? Do I make blessings any better? Do I, is my relationship between man and man any better? Those things you can gauge. Am I working on getting angry less? Am I working on not cursing? Am I working on Lashon Hara? These things you can see change. That you can see change straight away. Yeah. Things that are affect us more. Right? Things that are, let's say, person working on not cursing, let's say. They hear people curse. Right? Now they have a sensitivity. That's progress. Because you didn't have that sensitivity before. Or speaking badly against others or whatever, right? Once you have that sensitivity you didn't have before, that's already progress. Whether you stay up or go down, it doesn't matter, but that's progress. That for sure is progress. Is it wrong to not care if they are sorry or not? One second. It's just another lesson. Detached from it all. Again, if they're sorry, someone says, listen, I'm very sorry, I didn't mean it, I know it caused so much pain, but you have to understand that you can tell by body language and what they say they really mean it. You should forgive them 100%. It's not an easy thing to do. If they're saying it because they're saying it, but they don't really mean it, and we know this. A person's not stupid. They hear what the person says. They don't believe them. Yeah, they don't believe them in any way, shape, form. Okay. Let's say they don't have any believability. Fine. Should you just not care and accept it? If you can. If a person can look the other way, that's great. If you can't look the other way, then no. Is it better? You're going to ask me, is it better? Sure. But if someone, if someone has said, if they're going to do it again, or that they're not really sorry. Yeah, so what do? You can either accept it or not accept it. Should you? Depends on the person. I would tell you it's better to accept it either way. It's not easy to say you're sorry in either case, but let's say. Let's say. But it'll depend on what it is. But you're going to ask me, is it better? Sure, it's better. 100% it's better. Right? But it's not going to be easy to do because you don't want to let go of it because what the person did hurt you. Makes sense? Makes perfect sense. Yeah, to give up that hatred and that anger, okay, we should. We should all believe it's from God, and they use this person God's using this person as a stick to get to me, and very good. Yeah, that's all true. That's all fine. But you know what? The pain's still there. And they don't have any remorse or any regret. That's painful. That is painful. And they would do it again and this and that. So now you don't have to ask me the question, ask yourself the question. Is that acceptable? Can you live with that? If you can live with that in the bigger scheme of things and say, God did use this person as a stick, they're not really that bad, but they have an evil inclination, blah, blah, blah. Even if they would do it again, and you can accept that, and they're not really sorry, then do it. And all the power to you. I think it's a very hard thing to do. It's hard enough for someone to admit what they did is wrong, but if they don't really mean it, that's very hard. It's hard. Because they don't see they did, they don't think they did anything wrong. What does that mean? It means they don't care. So you want to accept something from someone who doesn't care? It's your choice. I'm not saying you have to. Definitely not saying you have to. Saying if you could do it, that's huge. I don't know if most people could do it. Yeah. If you're on a higher level, nothing, you're not going to get to you, so fine. Other people would be still weak. So you can say, okay, but they transgress bearing the grudge and this and that. Okay, not all things you have to accept. Right? Not all things, if someone apologizes, you have to accept. If you can, that's huge. That's definitely huge. Someone asks, we live for prayer for things instead of asking without speaking. Seems like we pray to be granted or not. You got to say the words anyway, so what? Right? You got to verbalize it. Right? Doesn't God know the thoughts of man? So what? Even if he does, you got to verbalize it. Right? It's not, God doesn't need you to verbalize it. You need to verbalize it. Why do you need to verbalize it? Because when you hear the words, it affects you. Right? Because the issue is, one second. Seems like we pray it can be granted or not. That's true. Someone asks, okay, if it's to make actual verbal requests, it's easy to pray. Now again, why should a person say it? What's the reason a person should say it? Because that's an effect on you. Yeah, verbal requests are hard, okay. But verbal requests should be made. Right? Words of my heart don't mean anything. God knows the thoughts of man, very good, but you got to request. You got to say things. Is it okay just to thank God for all the people who puts my life, but barely interact with them? You can. I mean, listen, there are, as we said before, there are no coincidences. People are put in our lives for a reason. Now, we might not always understand the reason. We may see this person as a negative influence or whatever. Okay. Well, they're in our lives for a reason. And again, it's not for us to try and figure that out. Sometimes we do figure it out. Sometimes we see that, we had a chance meeting with someone and this and that, and years later it comes to fruition otherwise. I have no idea. Nothing's a coincidence. 100%. Regardless of forgiveness, I'm guessing we need to be sincere when responding. You should be. 100%. If you can't be sincere, then say no. If it's something, again, let's make very clear. If it's something That's very hard for you to forgive. And it would be hard for anyone to forgive. Could very well be. You don't have an obligation. Try and forgive them. If you can, it's meritorious, 100%. But keep in mind, if you forgive somebody, it has to be 100%. If it's not 100%, that's not forgiveness. Can't be 50%. Can't be 30%. Can't be 75%. It has to be 100%. Doesn't mean you have to be best friends with them afterwards, but you have to forgive them with a full heart. With a full heart. That's so you're asking, well, well, you have to be sincere. 100% you have to be sincere. If you can't be sincere, then you have to say no. We have to say, you got to give me more time. We're doing the prayer from the Siddur alone. Do we read Chazan's part? No. No, that's only read. That's only read when you're part of a minyan. Yeah, when you're part with 10 men. If you're not part with 10 men, you don't say it. Right? What about responding Amen? You don't respond Amen. Why? Right? If you wouldn't say it, you don't respond Amen to it either. Yeah. Any other questions? Is detaching forgiveness like they really have no idea the effect they're having? It doesn't matter. Forgiveness means what they did, you're putting out of mind, out of sight. Doesn't matter. Yeah, it doesn't matter if they understand the effect they had or they don't understand the effect they have. Or let's say even better, they don't care what the effect was. That's even worse. They don't care what the effect was. Yeah, you're accepting them is irrelevant to anything they think. In other words, you're going to forgive them because you forgive them. Whatever their intention was, let's say their intention was malicious. Yeah, let's say. Is it going to be easier to accept them? No. It's not going to be easy to forgive them. If you can look at their intention as, let's say, not being malicious, they didn't know what they were doing, it doesn't mean it's not painful. It's still painful, right? If they did something malicious intent, is that harder to accept? Sure. Yeah. If someone says, just deal with it, that's the way it is. Deal with it. Yeah. Let's say they made a mistake. They don't want to own up to it. They say, okay, I did it. Okay. But they don't own up to it. You want to accept that? You can't. You can. I'm not saying you can't. It doesn't matter. In that sense, it doesn't matter. If they did it with malicious intent, I'm saying that's worse. It's a lot worse. Yeah. But at the end of the day, at the end of the day, that's harder. If they're malicious specifically for my learning, to accept you can't change people. Yeah. Yeah. Plenty of people have thought and said, you're crazy and, way you raised your kids. Okay. They don't know, maybe they're well-meaning. They want me to see the light. They want to see what I've done and different things, okay. What are they doing specifically to get me to change, to put, put a lot of pressure on? Okay. I have to guard myself, I have to guard my family. Yeah. So, your life comes first. Your learning comes first. All these people go, jump in a lake. It doesn't matter. So you got to get them out of your life. Anyone's trying to put pressure on you, have to get them out of your life somehow. Right? Or just not take what they say to heart. Someone asked, are any other prayers that we're not allowed to say in the Siddur other than Chazan's portion? Chanting and praying alone. You don't say the Kedusha, right? You don't say by Shemon Esrei, you don't say that, you don't say Baruch Hu. You don't say Baruch Hu in the morning. You don't say Kaddish, right? You don't answer any of those things for saying Kaddish. I'm not talking about the mourner's prayer, but or the prayer in between services or whatever. What else do you answer to? Those are the main things that you can't say. You don't say any of the prayers, let's say on Monday and Thursday, that have to do with reading the Torah, right? Or taking out the Torah, you don't say that. You don't say that as well. You don't. Those are the main things. I think those are the main things. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, I'm gonna stop here. This is every Saturday, 2 o'clock Eastern time, 9 o'clock Israel time. Anyone has any questions? You can find me on Facebook at Michael Chaim Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion to Judaism, OrthodoxConversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos, Q&A, that's my father's book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman at gmail.com, IBBICHIMCOFFMAN at gmail.com, which are good.